why are some people feeling like eating out is cheaper? And I think the reason is because they're having food go to waste. Hello, Tiffany Arielle here, and we are back with another video. So today we are going to be talking about food. So I don't know about y'all, but I have recently been seeing a lot of conversation floating around about whether eating at home, as in cooking for yourself, is actually cheaper than eating out. Now, I would have thought this was a no-brainer. Like, I thought we all knew that eating at home was cheaper, but it seems there's some disagreement. And so I was like, okay, let me go double check myself and make sure that I'm not really missing something. Like, I know groceries are high right now, but eating out is also high right now. So let's find out. So what I did was I made a spreadsheet and I considered 3 different scenarios. So scenario 1, eating out for pretty much every meal. Scenario 2, basically doing a meal prep for yourself where you cook one breakfast, one lunch, one dinner, and you eat that for about 5 days. And scenario 3, where you say, you know what, I don't want to meal prep. I need some more variety in my life. So maybe you make like 3 different options for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you kind of rotate between the 2 of them, or the 3 of them, sorry. And so basically you end up eating each recipe for about 2 days. So those are the 3 scenarios that I covered. So first, let's look at eating out. So I have my spreadsheet here. If you see me looking down, that's because I'm looking at my spreadsheet or my notes. So let's look at eating out. Breakfast. Let's assume that breakfast costs about $5 to eat out. Let's assume lunch costs about $10. Let's assume dinner costs about $15. Now, of course, this can vary depending on what type of restaurant you're eating at, what type of stuff you're ordering, whatever. But for me, when I eat out, I typically spend at least these amounts, oftentimes more. So I figured this was a good, little baseline. So if you add all that up over the course of 5 days, you end up spending a total of $150 over the 5 days, or an average of $10 per meal, because there's basically 15 meals over 5 days. So that's the summary of eating out. Now, let's go to meal prep, right? So let's assume that we make ourselves, some breakfast tacos. So we got some tortillas, we got some sausage, we got some eggs, some salsa, some shredded cheese. And, we add that up. And then for lunch, we're going to do a little falafel salad. So we need our falafel. We need whatever salad base we're going to use, some ranch, some carrots, some broccoli. You can use whatever toppings or vegetables, but this is just how I like to make mine. And then for dinner, we're going to make some mashed potatoes with some baked chicken and some green beans. So these costs are from me typing it into the Shipt app where I live, which is in Oakland, California, and basically the prices are based on what was there. So I do think this is actually a bit of an overestimation, because I think that ordering groceries via like Shipt or something like that is oftentimes more expensive than if you were to go to the grocery store yourself. And also, if you're going to the grocery store yourself, you would have the option to go to like different stores depending on what is cheaper. So for example, this falafel, I think this is quite expensive for some falafel. I think if you were to go to like Trader Joe's or something like that, you would be able to get falafel for like much cheaper. But yeah, so this is based on Safeway via the Shipt app. These are the real costs that were in there as of like 2 days ago when I compiled these numbers. So the total cost of these groceries is about $97, and the average cost per meal is $6.50, assuming that each of these recipes makes 5 servings, right? So yeah, $6.50. Now, this is also assuming that like I end up throwing away any Parmesan cheese or sour cream or, other perishables, eggs that I did not use. Now, if I'm a bit more realistic, which is that my Parmesan cheese, my sour cream, I'm probably not going to use all of it, and I'm probably going to be able to use it in the next week or the next week, then, I can have an adjusted estimation over here. So now we're looking at an average of about $6 per meal, so savings of about 50 cents per meal. So now you say, but I don't want to eat the same thing for 5 days. How do I get some variety? So let's do some variety. Now this list is much longer. We still got breakfast tacos for one of our breakfast options, but we've added in some oatmeal as another breakfast option. So we got some oats, some milk, some dried cranberries, almonds, brown sugar. We got some yogurt and granola as our third breakfast. Now for lunch, we have pretty much the same options for one of our meals. Sorry, pretty much the same items for one of our meals. And then our second lunch, we have a nice burrito bowl. So we got some beans, some rice, some onions, some bell pepper, cilantro, sour cream. Then our other lunch, let's just, a nice little tuna sandwich with some grapes. So we got tuna, bread, mayo, mustard, etc. Dinner. One of our meals, let's make some lentil pasta. So we're going to do some lentil pasta and some pasta sauce. Now, with this lentil pasta and pasta sauce, we're going to use some of the remaining carrots and broccoli from up here to add to our pasta. That way our carrots and our broccoli are not going to waste. Then one of our dinner options, basically the same that we had before, some baked chicken with some mashed potatoes, and in this case, Brussels sprouts. And then for our other meal, we'll do some fish and grits. So basically we need the fish, we need the grits. We're going to cook our grits in chicken broth because that makes it taste better. And we're going to add some smoked Gouda to our grits, and then we'll have some green beans as a vegetable. Now, this is more expensive because we're buying more food, but keep in mind, I did 3 options for each meal, and each option should make 2 servings. So this is actually going to feed us for 6 days as opposed to 5 days. But we're still at a more expensive average cost of about $7.32 per meal. Now, again, this is assuming that any of my dairy products are going to waste. I have eggs going to waste, I have milk going to waste, etc. If we say that we can reuse those items in a later week, then now the cost goes down to about $115 or about $6.42 per meal. So this isn't that much more expensive than the other option. It's just about 50 cents more expensive. Not too bad. So let's look at the summary, right? So these were the costs per meal, assuming, that I throw away any unused dairy products. So over the course of the week, eating out would cost me about $150. Cooking a few different options would cost me about $110. Meal prepping would cost me about $97.50. So if I meal prep, that means I will save about $52 over eating out. If I cook a variety of meals, I'll save about $40 over eating out. Now, one thing I will note, you've probably noticed I did not list any seasoning. The reason why I did not list any seasoning is because seasoning is not something that you're typically going to be buying every single week. To make all of the meals that I've listed here, you could pretty much buy a base level of maybe 4 to 5 different seasonings. Buy some salt, some pepper, some onion powder, garlic powder, smoked paprika, and you could pretty much make anything taste good with that combination. So in that case, what you would probably do is take your $40 to $50 savings from the first week and use that to kind of buy your seasonings, buy your oil. And so that first week, you probably wouldn't save any money. Maybe the first couple weeks, or depending on if you already have pots and pans. But then going forward, like once you've already bought your seasonings, bought your oils, bought your pots and pans, etc., you will definitely be saving money over time. So one of the things that I think is really, really important when we're having this conversation is, why are some people feeling like eating out is cheaper? And I think the reason is because they're having food go to waste. I think there are a few things you can do to minimize food waste, which is A, better for the environment, and B, better for your pockets. So for that, we're going to kind of apply the same principle of reduce, reuse, recycle that we would use when we're talking about environmental things. So first, let's talk about reduce. So this, obviously, buy the least amount of food as you possibly can. There are a few different ways you can do that. Number one, do not buy anything unless you have a plan for it. Don't go and say, I shouldn't say hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, have a plan for what you're going to buy. There are some things you can go ahead and stock up on if they're on sale, like, for example, meats that you can put in your freezer, or like dry goods that you can keep in your pantry for a while. Like that kind of stuff you can stock up on if you find a sale or if you have a coupon or whatever. But perishables, for sure, do not buy them unless you know exactly what you're going to do with them. The second thing, try to buy the smallest quantity you can buy of any perishables. Or anything that you feel like you might not use often. Because even non-perishables do go bad eventually. So if it's something that you're going to use like once a year, you don't want to buy like too much of it, because in a year, it's still probably not going to be at its best. But for perishables, especially produce, you want to buy the smallest amount you can. So in order to do this, I think one is to try to find a good grocery store that allows you to buy individuals. If I need a potato, like if I'm making mashed potatoes, I am not going to go and buy a 5-pound bag of potatoes to make mashed potatoes for one person. Like, I'm not doing that. I don't need that much potatoes. I only need like 1 or 2 potatoes, assuming russet potatoes, 1 or 2 potatoes. If I'm doing something with like red potatoes, I might need more, but still not 5 pounds of them, right? Carrots. A lot of the time, carrots come in a bag, but at many grocery stores, you can buy individual carrots. So if I only need 1 or 2 carrots, and I go to a store that allows me to do that, that's going to minimize the amount of waste that I have. So yeah, A, have a plan for your food. B, buy the smallest quantity you need. Now, that brings us to reuse. You might say, okay, well, I couldn't find a store that allowed me to buy individual carrots. I had to buy a whole bag of carrots. What am I supposed to do with the rest of these carrots? Now, in that case, that factors into your planning. So whenever I was showing my meal plan, we had the broccoli and the carrots for the falafel salad. We use the same broccoli and the carrots in the lentil pasta. Those are the kinds of things you can do to kind of like reuse ingredients in multiple different recipes. That way you're eating different things, but you're still able to leverage the ingredients that you bought for something else, and you're not wasting as much food. I think that's pretty much it for reuse. Now, recycle is not really recycle. It's more so a save for later. So in this case, we want to make sure that everything that we buy is properly stored. So if I buy breakfast sausage, for example, generally speaking, I'm not going to eat that whole pound pack of breakfast sausage in one sitting. I pretty much only make breakfast for myself like on the weekend. So I might use only like a 1/3 pound of breakfast sausage. So because I know that I'm only going to use a 1/3 pound of breakfast sausage, as soon as I buy that sausage, I'm going to cut it into 3 and I'm going to store each section in its own freezer bag. So that way my sausage is in the freezer. It's not sitting in my fridge going bad. Similar for any meat, fish, anything like that, make sure you separate it out and utilize your freezer. Shelf stable things like rice, beans, nuts, seeds, any of that kind of stuff. Get yourself some good airtight containers and just store them. I would not recommend leaving them in the little plastic bags that they come in, because that's how you get bugs and stuff like that. Ain't nobody got time. So get yourself some good airtight containers. You can buy, expensive food storage containers if you want. If you watched my pantry video, I did actually buy some really nice food storage containers, but that's mainly because my stuff is on a shelf and it's visible and everybody can see it. So I wanted it to be more aesthetically pleasing. But if you don't care about that, or you're just really on a budget, mason jars. Mason jars are a great tool. They are good for storing dry goods. They are also freezer safe. So we can use them to store cooked foods. Like, let's say you make a big batch of stew and you're like, I don't need this whole stew. You can put some into mason jars or in freezer bags, and you can put it in the freezer and save it for later. So that brings me to the next topic, which is cooked foods. You can actually proactively freeze cooked foods if you feel like you're not going to eat all of it. Certain things that freeze really well are like pasta sauces, beans, stews, soup, chili, like anything like that. You can, depending on your taste, also freeze other cooked foods, like let's say lasagna or pasta or things like that. But you may not like how it defrosts. It just depends on how picky you are. But if you do find yourself making a big lasagna and you're like, I'm probably not going to eat all of this, I would recommend at least trying to freeze it just to see if you like how it defrosts. If you don't, you haven't really lost anything besides a freezer bag or 2. But if you do, you're like, oh, this is actually still pretty good, then now you have lasagna for later. Now, this is good for 2 reasons. 1, you're minimizing food waste. And 2, when you have a day where you don't have time to cook or something like that, you can actually pull out that like pre-frozen food and just eat that instead of having to go out and like buy something. So that's that. I think the main thing, though, where a lot of people end up with food waste is produce. So I already kind of mentioned, the tip of buying as smaller quantity as you can, but there are also a lot of videos out there about like how to properly store produce that'll make it last longer. For example, some things are supposed to go in the fridge, some things are not supposed to go in the fridge, some things are supposed to be separated, like, because if they're with other things that can make the other stuff go bad, and like, there's a whole bunch of rules about how you're supposed to store produce. I don't really get into that too much because I pretty much buy small quantities and I use whatever I buy within the week. But if you are not in that situation, I would definitely advise looking up some videos on like how to properly store produce, because they have a lot of different tips like for greens and berries and just everything, so you can kind of get the most out of your produce. Another thing I would mention is things like bread and like dairy products oftentimes also go bad pretty early. Bread, I would recommend keeping in the refrigerator or possibly the freezer, depending on how frequently you're going to use it. I typically keep my bread in the fridge. It typically lasts pretty well in there. I just let it sit out for a couple minutes before I eat it. Or you can also microwave it. Or if you're making toast, it's even better because you're not going to notice a difference. Bread, you can also freeze bread, but again, I would make sure that you thaw it all the way before trying to use it. I think you can also freeze like milk, cheese, butter, etc. I have not tried this as an adult. We used to do it as a kid, but I don't remember if it came out well or not. So try at your own risk. But if you are worried about milk going bad, cheese going bad, butter going bad, like you can try to freeze them and see if you like it. But if you don't like it, don't come talk to me because, like I said, I don't do this personally. But just putting that out there. I think that's the main topics that I wanted to cover. So definitely comment down below if you've tried any of these things, if you have any good tips on how to reduce food waste and how to keep your food from going bad. Also, the spreadsheet that I went over will be linked down below, so feel free to check that out if you are interested. But as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with all your friends, and I'll see you next time. Bye!